Welcome, real estate rock stars, to our fifth session, 005 of So You Want to Be a Real Estate Rock and Roller. Well, being part of being a real estate rock and roller is being ahead of the market conditions. And today, in a brief departure, because the schedule that we had was we're going to talk about emancipating your activity on the back of the evaluation. We will get back to that this next week. But as is apparent with most real estate environments, that they are relatively liquid. And that means that you have to adapt and react as change comes into play. Not that this one is where it is. I can comfortably tell you that I'm starting to feel that the market itself is heading for that oh so apparent oversupply. Again, real estate markets are slower than most to react in terms of the time they take to turn around. But the reality is that we are pretty much in what I would refer to as the doldrums, which precipitates, of course, to the change of the environment and what I believe will eventually be an oversupplied market for some time. Nothing stays. It will change once it gets into oversupply eventually. Although one would have to argue that the change that we're in for could be one that is fairly prolonged. It's certainly my experience with the real estate environment was one where, I was introduced to the tail end of a boom in the marketplace, but that didn't last very long. And then we moved into a space where it was pretty much oversupplied for a continued period of time. And during that oversupply, there was no doubt in my mind, it was very clear that there were lots of things that were causing pressure, notwithstanding the fact that you had to be very careful in the prospecting game not to prohibit or limit people's expectation on hope and where their price would be. But if in being responsible, you could not give any assurances as to where that might end up in terms of market value and price, especially if that had a direct correlation to the motive. So it was that you had to be very centric to the motive, which is why I've been encouraging, real estate, peak performance pros to really focus on making everything about the listing centric to the motive. Now, this creates an almost automatic contrast anyway. Most agents tend to make their entire selling process, it's focused upon, the listing and then sale of the property. I think we get a little bit overly zealous on this, and that can cause owners to think that we don't really care about their motive. And I'm not saying that those agents that are centric to price or otherwise aren't doing that, but it is imperative that you focus on the seller's motive and make everything that you do centric around that. We've been in a boom period, and there might have been many instances where salespeople, in their eagerness to actually get the price across the line, sometimes allow this to supersede the owner's needs and can sometimes chase what was a good buyer away at a level that enabled them to do something. I can assure you won't be doing this forward. In any event, I see now that the marketplace is in what I would refer to as the doldrums. And by definition, I just quickly looked this up. The doldrums is a state or a period of stagnation or depression in the market where it's just doing nothing. Of course, in sailing, it means that you just reach that point where it's gone between some sort of breeze, just stopped completely. There's no breeze whatsoever as the conditions are changing between maybe two fronts or otherwise. And, it's being in this state of the doldrums. We're not really sure which way it's going. And of course, there's the hangover of sellers that are coming to the market. They might have an expectation, or they might even have a little bit of regret that they didn't get the property on earlier. You may well have advised them earlier on to get the property on, but notwithstanding that, They are now coming to market in what is seemingly a change. We are already seeing signs of this, certainly with lenders. Their criteria is steadfastly changing. If we make a direct correlation to that, that is one of those value variables which is beyond the capacity of your control. And so it is in adapting ahead of any change. And this is really what um, you have to be as a peak performance pro, versatile. And you have to, and I said this on a couple of occasions now, but you basically have to prepare for the worst and hope for the best. Not that a market that is oversupplied is the worst. In fact, I think it's more opportunistic than you can possibly realize. Looking at the market in paradox, we can comfortably say that, and let's be honest about this, that the real estate market is well overdue for some sort of correction, and many agents would look at uh, a market other than a seller's market as a bad market. I just look at it as though they're not real sure how to properly function inside that market. And last week I was talking about the fact, and I've also talked about this at great length. If you move yourself or grab yourself a copy of Sales Trainer online, basically on the back of the list and sell tool. So in a recent session, we just spoke about price and how price works. And I'm not going to overly reiterate that. I think that practically speaking, you can get your hands on that and have a good listen to it. What I do want to talk about now is that how you can start to move yourself into a space where you adapt ahead and anticipate the change in the market, and understand that you've got to start to put a lot of time and effort into controlling the owner's expectation as it relates to price. To do this, you have to take every conceivable opportunity to synthesize negotiations, to get them thinking about pricing in terms of how it has a correlation to their motive purely, to take their eyes off the ideal of winning that lottery and getting, I mean, it's not saying that they can't still do it. There'll be many instances of properties that you bring to market, particularly those properties that are ones that are coveted by a number of buyers. As they come to market, you will still find that they will still sell for a premium. They will sell relatively quickly. But generally speaking, as buyers go off to their lenders and the lenders tell them that the criteria has changed and their expectation lowers in turn with that, as the economy gets tighter, as more properties then start to come on the market and more are left there that aren't actually transacting, that aren't selling, and that oversupply then, if the demand is not just met but exceeded, then suddenly we've got too many properties on the market chasing too few buyers and downward pressure with price. And so it is that you've got to get your sellers thinking about this well before those offers come in that initially might seem below expectation. So how do you do this practically? Well, the first thing that I just want to reiterate, many of you might be familiar with it, but again, some of you might have forgotten the practice and others may not be using it at all. And that is the constant sowing of seeds. So when you're talking to an owner, anyone or any buyer that shows any interest at all can be presented to the property owner in the context of that interest with a tag of a number as it relates to that offer, especially if they haven't. And sometimes we think, well, if they haven't made an offer, how do we get that point across? Well, I reckon that's easier. And to some degree, I prefer to be giving some indication on price without the intervention of the buyer, because sometimes buyers, if they're a bit loose on it and they're not absolutely certain on it, can actually quote a number that's a little bit above what they eventually might be thinking when they sit down and actually give some thought to it and then look at making an offer in a more serious light. So one of the things I do, if I do have interest, if I've had a couple of people through, and if it's an auction and they've taken away a contract or otherwise to consider before going to that auction, or if they've indicated or they want to see some sort of contractual thing before making an offer, or they're saying that they want to come back for a second inspection, I will almost immediately telephone the owner and present that interest this way, something practical you might want to do. So I'll say to the seller, hello, how are you? It's me. If they ask you who me is, there's your first problem. That tells you that your communication is way too infrequent, because they should know you by voice recognition if you are speaking with them regularly enough. I then just say, it's me. Look, and these are the exact words I'll use. And I've got to say this, it's the only time as a trainer that I've absolutely insistent that not only do you follow the context of what I'm about to share with you, that you do not divert from the content. So quite often I say with dialogue, I'll give you the context and you can add your own style and then change it accordingly. So long as the context isn't diluted, you can change the actual words to those that suit you a little bit better. In this instance, I absolutely implore you, and certainly insist, if you're going to make any judgments about the effectiveness of the dialogue, that you don't change it a word of it at all. So my line will just go like this. Look, I don't want to get your hopes up yet, but I think I may have found you a buyer. I'll slow down on that. I don't want to get your hopes up yet, but I think I may have found you a buyer. So it's hope, think, may. Now, the seller will immediately get their hopes up and think that you've got it sold, but it's the leading line, and it's got a great little caveat on it where if nothing comes of it, you can say, I told you not to get your hopes up yet. I said I thought I only would have found you a buyer. So not to get your hopes up yet, I think I may have found you a buyer. I'll then move to explaining the current situation around that buyer. So I'll say, look, these buyers are moving from so-and-so. They're in a position to proceed right now. They've been to their lender. The lender they've indicated to me, approved them to a certain amount of finance. Now, what I have done with the buyers, I've asked them to go back to the financier, because at this stage, it's only a verbal approval just to confirm where they're at. And let's say the property was on the market. We're just picking a number. Let's say it was on the market at 650. And the buyer's looking maybe around the 600, and you kind of know that too with what's going on in the marketplace. And I'll say at this stage, it appears to me that the buyer is likely to come in at around 550. And then I just shut up. Now, a lot of you be thinking, 550, goodness me, that's awfully low. Now, even if I'm thinking, comparatively speaking, that the properties may be sitting at 6 or maybe a little bit above that in the early 6s. I'm also aware of a market that in some ways is starting to come down in price, so I've got to compensate for that. And I've also got to compensate for the expectation of the owner in indicating where they might actually come in. It might be true, and because it's speculation, they're likely to err on the side of being lower rather than higher. So who knows, when you're looking at a drop, who knows how far it's going to go. And in any event, I want to get the seller's mindset to a place where they're going to catch the market. Now, I'll talk about this in a great deal as we go on in future episodes of Real Estate RocknRolla. But in the same way that you've actually had an environment where markets have been climbing, and during the climb inside the market, I say that overpricing a property is no different to a bad haircut, or the difference between a good haircut and a bad haircut. You can afford to overprice a property in a rising market, because typically it's only a matter of time as the market rises before it catches up with that over expectation. Now, in a falling market, as a market becomes oversupplied, as the market is falling, you've got to allow the seller to get their expectation below the drop. Why? Because if they are effectively, if you're telling them exactly where you anticipate the drop is right now, by the time they reach a point of acceptance, the market can actually have gone or fallen below that again. So what you don't want your sellers doing, mentally speaking, in terms of anticipation, is chasing the market down. You want them to get ahead of the drop so that they can catch a buyer, So you've got to position their expectation below that fall. And in any event, we're talking about a negotiable situation here. Now, this is, again, advanced thinking. It's high level. And for some people, it's a little bit above where they're thinking things ought to be. But in reality, all you're doing by telling them that you're thinking that they're going to come in at 550, whilst it might seem like a big chunk, is you're just following a major principle around negotiation. You're asking for more than you really want. This is an operative principle of any negotiable situation. You should always ask for more than you really want in the first instance, especially if you're invited to. Again, that's for another argument on another day. So in this context, we're saying 550. Now, when you give that number, you immediately stop talking. Do not say anything. Don't add any other little bits and pieces in. Like, for instance, we're at 550, but that's where they're going to start, or anything like that. You've just got to see the reaction of the seller. So you offer them the number and then shut up. Now, this can sometimes lead to a sustained silence. Again, you've got to be brave around this and let it go until they speak, because the first to speak loses. I know this sounds weird, but it's called, again, it's another principle inside negotiation, the silent close. The less said sometimes, the more powerful it is, until you gauge their reaction. So invariably, that could come back in a whole number of ways. It could vary all the way from them just simply saying in a very passive manner, okay, all the way through to them totally unhinging and being almost hostile. 550, you've got to be kidding. You told me when you first came down here, look, just take it off the market. We don't want anything to do with it. And of course, that reaction can then lead to them sometimes in a knee-jerk reaction saying, you take it off the market. Or, we'll rent it out, and all number of other threats that they throw at you. Now, salespeople over the years, in my experience, are frightened of this. And that's the very reason that they refrain, especially on the tail end of what has been an undersupplied market, where prices have been escalating up and sellers have pretty much had their way with the market. As we move into the doldrums, agents, salespeople almost fear doing this, because we feel like we fought so hard to get the opportunity around this property, we can't do anything with it. And all those what ifs then come into play. Well, what if somebody does come along and pay it? Look, that can still happen. This is where you need to learn about being inside the grey area and not straying from it. You see, it's not our job to speak in absolutes. It's our job to understand that the market itself is liquid, that the conditions and that the buyers are confronted with and sellers are confronted with, they vary too. In this instance that I've just given you, where lenders are changing their criteria, that's, as I said, that's a value variable that you can't control. Others are going to creep in, whether it be supply and demand, or number of properties coming to market, whether it be what the competition's doing. These are variables you can't control. And of course, what we want to do is get into the space around the variables that we do have some control around. And that, of course, is marketing, negotiation, and communication, and how you talk. And this is vastly what we're doing inside communication. It's how we're getting the messages across to those sellers and how they're perceived and what might be done. So let me just recap that. And I'll just put this all in nice and quickly. So you ring the owner, you basically start open with that opening dialogue. Don't want to get your hopes up yet, but I think I may have found you a buyer. These buyers, whether it be, they're in a position, they've sold their property from wherever they're moving from, they've been to their lender, their finance is approved. I'm just anticipating an offer. I have asked them to go back to the financier to confirm that in the interim, but at this stage, it looks like they're coming in at 550. I move to the silent close. I wait to see their reaction. Then according to the reaction, I move from there. So in that reaction, they might just turn around and say, if they're fairly calm, yeah, that's okay. I'll then move into, okay, well, I'll get them down to the property once we've had a look at it. My job, as I see it, is to extract that offer and then get them to the best number I can. and then we've got something to consider. But at this stage, it looks like they're all A-OK. I just have to confirm their disposition. Or if they went nuts, if they went off the Richter and said, take it off the market or whatever, it could be, if it's really at the nth degree where they're saying take it off the market or we'll rent it, I might call their bluff. I might say, well, maybe you do need to reconsider, because at this stage, I think they're in the ballpark. Again, that's a value judgment you can make on your own. If they threaten to rent it out, I might say, well, perhaps I should before we get to that point, let's see where we go with this buyer, but I might warm the property manager up to the idea of having a look at it, because we might end up having to do that. But my favored response, if they get a bit hostile, is I just go, look, I said that's where I think they'll come in. It's only where they're going to start. It's where they finish that makes all the difference. This may amount to nothing. As I said, I don't want to get your hopes up yet too quickly. Why don't we just wait until I get them in front of me? We've had a second look at the property. We've confirmed their finance, and then I get an offer in front of you. Well, then we'll have something to consider. But this has had the overall desired effect of initiating negotiations. It affords the owner the opportunity to then discuss it prior to the offer even coming in. Certainly if it's overnight, I've no doubt that they'll spend the evening staring at the ceiling, looking at each other and saying, well, what marks give us? And they'll be discussing it in the context of a base start of 550. And mostly they will start to consider their contingencies should that offer come in at 550 and where they want to move from there. But in any event, it will lower their expectation and give them a good anchoring point to start the negotiations on, and certainly hold you in good stead. Now, there's other ways of doing this. If you've got properties that are currently priced highly and you've had no movement in them whatsoever, and that's as a result of that, you can't even get people inquiring on the property, much less getting them to the open homes, you can still initiate these negotiations purely and simply by communicating in the same context, hypothetically, these numbers across to an owner. So again, using that same property, if I had no buyer present, I might just ring the owner and I'll say, look, hi, it's me. They say, hi, me, how are you? Say, pretty good. Look, I don't want to talk to you about the property. I've already told you that we're not getting much interest there at the moment. Can I ask you, what are you going to do if this doesn't work out? Now, they've never heard you say that, because most of the conversations you most likely have been upbeat. They've been fairly positive about bringing the property to market, about getting buyers coming across to the open for inspections, looking at the property, making offers. And we've talked to them largely in the context of fulfilling their motive, getting the property sold and then moving on their way. Now, this hasn't happened. This can sometimes put a little bit of downward or negative pressure on the relationship that you have with them, albeit that it's not your fault. And why I bring this up, I'm just going to put this into context again around making sure that you don't accept responsibility for the market. So I can just say to them, how's it going? Look, do you mind if I was just going to say to you, what are you going to do if this doesn't work out? That's the line. So I say to them, I'll call. Hi, it's me. How are you? Don't really want to talk about the marketing and stuff. I've already had a word with it. Can I ask you, what are you going to do if this doesn't work out? They've never been confronted with that negative. Now, you presenting that negative forces them to move into the future space and start thinking, well, what if it doesn't work out? And what you're checking for is there a contingency? Now, if they turn around and say, well, if it doesn't work out, we're going to take it off the market and rent it. Now, this could be a bluff, but in any event, it's telling you that they are planning for it to fail because they already have a contingency in place. And to me, in that concept, I'm perfectly vindicated in saying, well, I don't think it's going to work out, so maybe we need to start exploring that option of renting it out. Now, to many of you, you'll feel awkward around this, but I believe you've got to call their bluff at some stage, and you've got to move them into that space, because no good is going to come from leaving the property where it is. And then what I do is, once I've hit them with that, what are you going to do if it doesn't work out? I then say, can I think aloud? And I'll say, yeah, what? So again, in the context of this property, I said, if I had a buyer right now, ready to go on your property at 550, what would you do? Now that's a big price shock, especially if they're at 650. But I run the 550, and again I shut up, same way as I did with the sowing of the seed in a real negotiation. This is a synthesized situation, and I see what they say. Now, if they blow up, if they explode again, 550, that's ridiculous. If that's really what you think it's going to do, just rent it out and take it off the market. I'll just say, hey, hang on. I didn't say I did have a buyer at 550. I said, what would you do if I had a buyer at 550? Now I know, thank you. And then I just end the conversation. I've delivered that same scenario and made it all work. Now, finally, what I want to make clear on this, and I hope that you've paid attention to what I'm saying in and around, and these are just initial little processes. They're very habitual things that you will find that you'll be doing over and over again. But you just have to, in preparation, if not already, start to make the move around controlling the expectation of sellers as they come to market and what the market might do. What you don't want to do is, with any of this dialogue, is be adding in little things like, I'm sorry to say, or, you know, I know that you're not going to be happy with this, but, because the way that you're explaining that, if I was to say, look, I'm sorry to say that at this stage, I think they're going to come in at 550, or I know you're not going to be happy with what I'm about to tell you, but the offer is lower than what you wanted and it's at 550, and you're sounding apologetic, it's almost like you're accepting responsibility for this event occurring, and that you're accepting responsibility for the state of the market. Now, if there's one thing I want you to stay right out of, is accepting responsibility for the marketplace. We're in the doldrums. The market is something you can't control. We all have to work within the confines of the market. And in any event, you want to be positioning yourself on the side of the owner. Yes, you're delivering less than palatable news, but you've got to get them to understand that you are dealing with the market and there is only so much that you can control comfortably. There is only so much that you have control over on their behalf. And this, of course, is those variables, and I come back to that over and over again. You can market a property to a degree, but the reality is, if the expectation, or worse, the asking price on that property is not delivering inquiry to you, much less actually getting people coming to the property and viewing it, well, it's very simplistic. What we're saying is that property is now appealing to the wrong price bracket, because whomever is looking in that price bracket is not seeing the value that they need to see inside that property. Hence, there's no inquiry. So the way I communicate this to a seller is I say, look, at the end of the day, asking price is not much more than bait. If your asking price is not prohibiting inquiries from buyers and inspections from buyers, and indeed offers from buyers, then I'm okay with its level and where it's at. But if it's not getting any inquiry, it's not getting any inspections, and certainly no offers are forthcoming, we just can't leave that bait the way that it is. We have to change the bait to actually increase the number of buyers that are coming through. Yes, it's different. Yes, it's a new mode that you've got to be running with. It might be a little bit premature, but you need to be thinking about this. And I'm sure that you've got a couple of sellers that immediately come to mind that wanted to exploit the market. They erred on the top end of expectation. They're kind of sitting there and they're driving you mad. Well, now's the time to take control of those sellers around their expectations and get things back into perspective. Hope this has made sense. I hope that you're listening to this on audio a couple of times and getting it clear in your mind. But start the sowing of seeds, or at least those hypothetical negotiations with your owners. Do it earlier. The earlier the better, and just manage their expectation into price so that you are basically are still producing at record numbers. And I can assure you that the one thing that will get the attention of many other sellers out there is properties that are moving, owners that are moving and fulfilling motors. And this, of course, is gleaned by the number of sold stickers that you're seeing on the signs that you have. My name's Mark Dwyer. You can reach me at Mark with a K at realestaterockstar.com.au. My phone number is +61 410 no 0410 yeah +61 410 592 165. And I hope to catch you soon as a real estate rock and roller as we keep rocking real estate and shaking its very foundations.